Halloween is supposed to be candy, costumes, and cheap thrills. Yet every year, America's pettiest warriors file battlefield reports to HOAs, hotlines, and very confused cops. Tonight, 69 real neighbor meltdowns, historically inaccurate ghosts, politically active skeletons, and a fog machine microclimate. Grab a full-size bar and witness how a plastic pumpkin can start a civil war. 1. A homeowner in suburban Ohio received a visit from two police officers after their neighbor reported a gruesome crime scene. The crime? A very realistic-looking dummy stuffed with leaves, laying face down in their front yard with a plastic axe nearby. The complaining neighbor was convinced it was a real body and insisted the police investigate, despite it being October 30th. After a brief awkward conversation, the officers left, presumably to hunt for some actual crime, leaving the homeowner to wonder if their neighbor had ever actually seen a calendar. 2. In a Florida HOA, a resident filed a formal complaint against a family for their choice of trick-or-treat candy. It wasn't about allergies or safety. The complaint stated that offering generic, non-brand name candy lowered the overall prestige of the neighborhood. They insisted that only premium, fun-sized brand-name chocolate bars were acceptable. The HOA letter seriously suggested a list of approved candies for the following year to maintain community standards. Imagine being the person who has time to write that letter. 3. A call was made to a local non-emergency line in Oregon about unlicensed pyrotechnics and potential satanic rituals. The source of this panic was a neighbor's fog machine bubbling over a plastic cauldron lit by a single orange light bulb. The caller was deeply concerned that the family was summoning spirits in their driveway. The responding officer found a dad in a cheap vampire costume trying to figure out why the fog kept smelling faintly of burnt plastic, not brimstone. 4. One of the most common, yet somehow most baffling complaints, comes from people obsessed with their lawns. A man in Texas installed security cameras just to document every single trick-or-treater who dared to cut across his perfectly manicured grass to get to his door faster. He didn't complain about noise or vandalism, just the flagrant disrespect for turf integrity. He later tried to present the footage at a community meeting as evidence of neighborhood decay. 5. The inflatable decorations are a modern battleground. A woman in Arizona complained that her neighbor's 12-foot-tall inflatable ghost was blocking her natural light. Her complaint to the city specified that the ghost's shadow fell directly onto her prize-winning petunias for a crucial 45 minutes each afternoon, which she claimed was stunting their growth and causing them emotional distress. She demanded the ghost be deflated during these peak sunlight hours. 6. This one is a masterclass in pettiness. A homeowners association in Virginia received a complaint that a neighbor's decorations were intentionally and maliciously tacky. The primary offender was not a gory zombie or a demonic clown, but a series of hand-painted wooden ghosts with googly eyes made by the homeowner's 7-year-old daughter. The complaint argued that the crude and amateurish decor was negatively impacting their property value by making the street look unsettlingly cheerful. 7. A complaint was filed against a house that used a motion-activated screaming sound effect near their walkway. The issue wasn't that it was too loud or too scary for kids. The neighbor, an avid bird watcher, claimed the high-pitched shriek was sonically identical to the mating call of the North American screech owl and was confusing the local bird population during a critical migration period. He demanded they switch to a sound that was less ornithologically ambiguous, perhaps a low moan. 8. You've heard of Keeping Up with the Joneses, but this is trying to tear them down. A man complained to his HOA that his neighbor's Halloween display, which included a full animatronic graveyard and a projected light show, was unfairly spectacular. He claimed the professional-level setup created unrealistic expectations for other residents and was a form of holiday-based intimidation. Essentially, he was angry that his single plastic pumpkin looked pathetic by comparison and wanted the other guy to tone it down. 9. Believe it or not, A police department in Connecticut got a call about a suspicious individual lurking in a neighbor's window every night. The caller described a gaunt, pale figure with dark, hollow eyes who stood motionless for hours. An officer was dispatched to investigate, only to find it was a life-sized cardboard cutout of the character Michael Myers from the movie Halloween. The neighbor insisted it was promoting stalking and demanded it be taken down. 10. In a classic case of pet pampering gone wild, a woman complained that her neighbor's simple spiderweb decoration, complete with a large, furry plastic spider, was causing severe emotional trauma to her purebred Pomeranian Tiffany. According to the complaint, Tiffany was now refusing to do her business in the yard and required extra cuddle sessions to cope. The woman demanded the immediate removal of the spider and financial compensation for a doggy therapy session she had booked. 11. A resident in a high-end California community lodged a formal complaint about the socioeconomic implications of the cars parking on their street for trick-or-treating. They weren't mad about the quantity of cars, but the quality. The letter claimed the influx of non-luxury domestic minivans was creating a transient and unsettling atmosphere. They unironically requested that visitors be required to park outside the gates and walk, all to preserve the neighborhood's visual and economic harmony. 12. In a bizarre act of preemptive indignation, a woman in Illinois complained to her neighborhood Facebook group on October 15th about the inevitable future stench of her neighbor's uncarved pumpkins. She demanded they provide her with a written decomposition and disposal schedule, complete with a guarantee that the pumpkins would be removed by 9 a.m. sharp on November 1st, before they could even begin to offend her nostrils with their foul, autumnal decay. 13. Ever gotten a disappointing treat on Halloween? Well, one parent in New Jersey took it to the next level. They called the police to report a house for distributing nutritionally responsible treats, specifically small boxes of raisins and granola bars. The father claimed it was psychological cruelty to offer children a false promise of sugar, and that the homeowners were actively sabotaging the spirit of the holiday. Can you imagine the dispatcher trying to keep a straight face for that call? 14. A man in Vermont threatened legal action against his neighbor because he was convinced their scarecrow was a caricature of him. The scarecrow wore a simple flannel shirt and a fishing hat, which the man claimed was his signature look. He alleged it was a deliberate act of slander via scarecrow, and that local children were pointing and mocking him. The neighbor insisted it was just a generic scarecrow they bought at a hardware store for $10. 15. Here's a complaint that's all about aesthetics. An HOA in North Carolina received a grievance because a resident was using blue and green lights instead of the traditional and appropriate orange and purple. The complainant wrote a 2-page letter detailing the historical and emotional significance of the classic Halloween color palette. They argued that the aquatic-themed lighting was more suitable for a summer pool party and was creating a sense of seasonal confusion for passersby. 16. How long is too long to leave up Halloween decorations? For one neighbor in Washington, the answer is about 12 hours. A complaint was logged on the morning of November 1st against a family who hadn't yet taken down their inflatable black cat. The neighbor claimed the lingering decoration was a blatant disregard for the upcoming Thanksgiving season and was preventing the neighborhood from moving forward emotionally. Yes, apparently a giant inflatable cat can hold an entire community hostage. 17. A family in Arizona decorated their porch with beautiful, traditional Dia de los Muertos sugar skulls and marigolds. Their neighbor, completely missing the cultural context, called code enforcement to report an unauthorized graveyard celebration. The complaint cited the display as morbid and not in the fun-loving spirit of American Halloween. They were apparently furious when told it was a completely different holiday and that, no, they couldn't force them to replace the sugar skulls with jack-o'-lanterns. 18. We've all heard the Monster Mash a few too many times, right? But one neighbor in Massachusetts reported his neighbor to the Environmental Protection Agency for noise pollution. The source of this environmental hazard? A single speaker playing the theme from the movie Ghostbusters on a continuous loop. He claimed the song's repetitive nature was causing him migraines, and that the phrase, "I ain't afraid of no ghost," was becoming an auditory torment that was seeping into his dreams. 19. A man in Pennsylvania complained to the police about his neighbor's zombie decorations, which were crawling out of the ground. His reason wasn't that they were too scary for kids. It was that he was an avid fan of zombie movies and claimed the decorations were anatomically and logistically inaccurate. He insisted that everyone knows a zombie of that decompositional stage wouldn't have the motor skills to crawl like that. He wasn't scared. He was just an offended horror nerd. 20. A complaint was filed because a homeowner put small custom-made masks on the faces of the skeletons in their yard display. The neighbor wasn't upset about the skeletons themselves, but claimed that the masks were a passive-aggressive political statement about current events. The complaint didn't specify which side of the issue they were on, just that Halloween should be an escape from reality, not a silent, bony commentary on public health policy. 21. A woman called the fire department because she was concerned about the contents of her neighbor's decorative witch's cauldron. It was filled with water and dry ice to create a spooky fog effect. She was convinced they were mixing unknown, volatile chemicals and that the resulting vapor was toxic and probably radioactive, posing an imminent threat to her and her prize-winning rose bushes. The fire department had to explain basic 8th grade chemistry to a very panicked adult. 22. In a truly unique complaint, a man from a second-floor apartment filed a report against his downstairs neighbor for their animated Grim Reaper decoration. The issue? The Reaper's rhythmic, scythe-swinging motion was causing a subtle but persistent vibration in his floorboards, which he claimed was misaligning his vinyl record player's stylus and ruining the fidelity of his classic rock collection. He demanded the Reaper cease its reaping for the sake of the music. 23. A tenant in an apartment building made repeated calls to building security about disembodied voices plotting against him that he could hear through his walls. He was convinced his neighbors were part of a cult. After a week of escalating panic, the manager finally investigated. The source? A motion-activated talking candy bowl by the neighbor's front door that would whisper, "Take only one, if you dare," every time someone walked down the hallway. 24. In a classic case of tech paranoia, a man filed a police report against his neighbor for installing covert surveillance equipment. He was certain a small blinking red light aimed directly at his living room window from his neighbor's roof was a high-tech recording device. The equipment turned out to be a $3 fake security camera prop, part of a display themed around a haunted laboratory. The blinking red light was its only feature. 25. An HOA in a suburb of Maine sent a cease and desist letter to a homeowner for tying single red balloons to the sewer grates along their street. The complaint wasn't about littering or aesthetics. The board stated that the balloons, an obvious nod to Stephen King's It, were actively encouraging children to interact with the municipal drainage system and creating a public safety hazard based on fictional horror tropes. You have to appreciate the bureaucratic phrasing. 26. A woman in Colorado complained about a toxic airborne substance emanating from her neighbor's yard, claiming it was causing her respiratory distress. She was convinced they were secretly operating a meth lab under the guise of Halloween. A hazmat-cautious investigation revealed the source of the smell: a small plug-in scent diffuser hidden in the bushes, set to the fragrance Haunted Forest, which apparently smells a lot like damp dirt and synthetic fog juice. 27. A household in Louisiana got a visit from the sheriff's department after a neighbor reported a grisly homicide in their driveway. The evidence was a car, splattered with fake blood, with a mannequin hand sticking out of the slightly ajar trunk. Despite the homeowner explaining it was a decoration, The neighbor refused to believe them and called the police every single morning for 5 days straight, insisting a fresh murder had taken place overnight. 28. One of the more peculiar complaints involved a flock of fake plastic crows. A neighbor insisted that the realistic-looking decoys were attracting and organizing the local crow population. He claimed the real crows would sit on the fence, staring at the plastic ones, as if receiving orders for some kind of future attack. He described it as a Hitchcockian nightmare and demanded the plastic ringleaders be removed before the birds unionized. 29. This one is genuinely terrifying until you know the punchline. An elderly woman called 911 in a panic, whispering that there was a pale, ghostly child appearing and disappearing at the end of her upstairs hallway. Police responded, ready for anything. The ghost was a faint, flickering image from the neighbor's new Halloween projector, which was slightly misaligned and casting the edge of its spooky graveyard scene directly onto her wall. 30. A complaint was filed not for what was put up, but for what was taken away. A resident replaced every single one of their exterior light bulbs, porch lights, garage lights, walkway lights, with black lights. There were no other decorations, just an eerie, silent, purple-black glow. The neighbor complained it was psychologically disturbing and made the street feel like a perpetual, large-scale crime scene investigation every single night. 31. How's this for a haunted house? A family in a new housing development put a single, terrifyingly realistic clown doll on a small tricycle and chained it to a stake in their front yard. The neighbor's complaint was that every morning, the clown was in a slightly different position. They were convinced the homeowner was sneaking out at night to move it incrementally closer to their property line as a form of slow-burn psychological warfare. 32. One of the most effective and unnerving displays involved no gore at all. A family placed a dozen life-sized mannequins in their front yard. All were dressed in plain, everyday clothing. They were just standing there, motionless, all silently facing the neighbor's house. The neighbor called the police to report a silent, intimidating mob had formed on their lawn and that they felt like they were living under constant plastic judgment. 33. A father complained that his neighbor's haunted maze, constructed from corn stalks, was emotionally damaging to his 8-year-old son. The reason? The maze was too easy. He claimed that his son solved it in under a minute, which gave the boy a false sense of intellectual superiority and would make it harder for him to handle real-world challenges later in life. He demanded they make the maze significantly more difficult to properly build character. 34. A homeowner in a quiet cul-de-sac set up a single chair on his porch with a skeleton sitting in it. That's it. The complaint? The skeleton was positioned at an angle where it was staring directly into our kitchen window while the family ate dinner. The neighbor claimed the constant bony gaze was ruining their appetite and making family meals unbearably awkward. They asked if the skeleton could at least be turned to face the street. 35. And then there's the complaint about the music. A neighbor didn't mind the volume or the spooky sound effects. They complained that the neighbor's playlist was anachronistically inaccurate. The display was a medieval-themed dungeon, but the music was from 1980s slasher films. The complaint literally stated, "The jarring dissonance between the 14th century visual aesthetic and the 20th century synthesizer score is artistically offensive. You just can't make this stuff up." 36. A health-conscious neighbor in Portland, Oregon, filed a complaint with the city's sanitation department over the improper disposal of pumpkin viscera. The family in question was composting their pumpkin guts in their own backyard bin. The complainant argued that the rotting pumpkin innards created a noxious biohazard and an irresistible attractant for rogue squirrels and other urban vermin. They demanded a professional biowaste team be sent to handle the situation. 37. The future of annoying your neighbors is here. A man in a tech-savvy suburb of Austin complained that his neighbor was using a drone, draped in a white sheet to look like a ghost, to personally harass his dog. He provided security footage of the drone ghost hovering just out of reach of his barking golden retriever in the backyard. The complaint stated the drone was causing canine anxiety and undue aerial stress. What a time to be alive. 38. In an almost unbelievable twist, a family received a formal violation notice from their HOA for not decorating for Halloween. The letter stated that their stark, unadorned facade was disrupting the festive continuity of the street. It went on to say that failing to participate in community holiday celebrations made the home appear unoccupied and vaguely menacing, thereby lowering the neighborhood's overall curb appeal. They were given 48 hours to display at least one pumpkin or face a fine. 39. A resident of a Chicago apartment complex complained about a constant, unnerving broadcast coming from the apartment next door. They were convinced it was some kind of jamming signal or a coded message. The building manager investigated, only to find the neighbor had placed a cheap old-school baby monitor next to a creepy-looking porcelain doll on their balcony. The receiver was just inside their own apartment, broadcasting nothing but static and the occasional hiss of the wind. 40. One of the most widespread complaints is also one of the most ridiculous. A man threatened to sue his neighbor over the fake stretchy spider webs they had draped over their bushes. He wasn't scared of spiders. He was concerned about liability. He claimed the webbing constituted an unregulated public entanglement hazard and wrote a letter detailing a hypothetical scenario where a small child or a particularly clumsy squirrel could become ensnared, leading to injury or panic. 41. This is a story of Halloween intellectual property theft. A woman called the non-emergency police line to report that her neighbor had plagiarized her decoration theme from the previous year. Both yards featured a scene of skeletons having a backyard barbecue. The woman insisted she was the first person in the neighborhood to ever think of it and demanded the police force her neighbor to cease and desist and come up with their own more original, undead tableau. 42. An environmentally focused resident in California started a petition to limit the use of non-biodegradable plastics in seasonal displays. The target was his neighbor's extensive collection of plastic skeletons, pumpkins, and spiders. His complaint wasn't that it was tacky, but that it was an ecological travesty. He argued that these petroleum-based ghouls will languish in a landfill for centuries, long after we ourselves are actual skeletons. He even offered to help the neighbor craft some compostable corn husk dolls instead. 43. Sometimes the complaints get weirdly philosophical. A family put up a display themed around a zombie apocalypse, complete with boarded-up windows and a large, hand-painted sign that simply said, "The end is near." Their neighbor complained to the HOA that the sign was causing them profound existential dread and was too philosophically heavy for a holiday meant for children and candy. They requested the sign be changed to something more lighthearted, like "Boo." 44. It's not just people who get offended. A woman complained that her neighbor's display of zombie garden gnomes was deeply insensitive. She wasn't a gnome owner herself, but she argued that portraying the mythical creatures as shambling, brain-eating monsters was perpetuating harmful stereotypes and was a form of defamation against the entire gnome community. I wonder what the gnomes themselves thought about it. 45. Talk about taking things personally. A man named Walter filed a formal complaint because his next-door neighbor had a decorative tombstone in their yard with the inscription, "Here lies Walter DeMelt. He rotted well." The neighbor insisted it was a random pun they'd seen online, but Walter was convinced it was a thinly veiled and deeply personal threat. He claimed he could no longer enjoy his morning coffee without seeing his own name on a tombstone, and demanded it be changed to a less personal name, like Frank. 46. In another case of pet-related panic, a woman insisted that her neighbor's simple hanging bat decoration was hypnotizing her cat. The bat, which dangled from a tree branch, would spin slowly in the wind. The neighbor provided video of her cat, Chairman Meow, sitting motionless at the window for hours, staring intently at the spinning bat. She claimed the satanic pendulum was a form of feline brainwashing, and the cat had started refusing his favorite brand of wet food. Clustery. 47. A complaint was lodged against a home for its audio setup. They weren't playing loud music or screams. They were playing a crystal-clear recording of children laughing and giggling, but slowed down by about 50%. The neighbor reported that the sound, which drifted eerily across the street, wasn't scary in a fun way, but was profoundly and deeply unsettling, and was making them question the very nature of childhood joy. 48. An HOA in a meticulously planned community in Florida took its rules to a whole new level. A resident received a violation for the font used on their homemade "Keep Out" sign. The HOA had circulated a memo with a list of 5 approved Halloween fonts, which included styles like Creepster and Metal Mania. This resident had used Comic Sans, which the board deemed whimsical and tonally inappropriate, stating it undermined the atmospheric integrity of the season. 49. A resident in a historic district of Savannah, Georgia complained that his neighbor's ghost decorations were historically inaccurate. The neighbor had hung simple white sheet ghosts from their ancient oak trees. The complainant, a self-proclaimed local historian, argued that the documented ghosts of their specific street were from the 18th century and would have worn period-appropriate linen shrouds, not modern, high-thread count cotton poly blends. He even offered to help them age the fabric for authenticity. 50. In a classic case of misinterpretation, a family put up a sign on their door that read, "Out of candy, sorry." Their neighbor, who was having a small party, called the police to report a vaguely threatening and passive-aggressive message. She was convinced the sign wasn't a simple statement of fact, but was aimed directly at her and her guests, implying they were a sorry group of people. The responding officer had to act as a linguistic mediator for 10 minutes. 51. A complaint was filed over the color temperature of a strobe light. A man in a suburban development claimed his neighbor's cold, blue-white strobe light was triggering his fight-or-flight response, while the warm, yellowish strobe lights used by other houses were perfectly acceptable. He included a detailed color-coded diagram of the street's lighting scheme and argued that the one, aggressive clinical, light was disrupting the overall spooky yet cozy ambiance of the block. 52. A family decorated their house to look like the iconic home from the movie Psycho, complete with a silhouetted figure in an upstairs window. A neighbor, who had never seen the film, complained to the city that the run-down and derelict appearance of the house was a code violation. They reported peeling paint, which was fake, boarded-up windows, also fake, and a general state of disrepair, demanding the city force the homeowners to clean up their blighted property. 53. A woman in a rural town complained to the sheriff that her neighbor's ultra-bright security floodlights, which they installed for their elaborate Halloween display, were interfering with her alien reception. She claimed the light pollution was blocking the subtle cosmic signals she usually received on her satellite dish, and that the government was clearly using Halloween as an excuse to suppress extraterrestrial communication. The sheriff's report just said, "Advised citizen on lighting." 54. An HOA in a retirement community had a very specific rule. All decorations must be cheerful and non-threatening. One resident received a violation for a single, smiling jack-o'-lantern. The reason? The carving was too ambiguous. The board stated in their letter that its enigmatic Mona Lisa-like smile could be interpreted as either happy or mischievous, and this lack of clear emotional intent was unsettling for residents who prefer their gourds to have a clear and positive disposition. 55. The award for the most baffling complaint goes to a man who reported his neighbor for impersonating a federal agent. The neighbor, a huge fan of the X-Files, had dressed 2 skeletons up as the characters Mulder and Scully and placed them on lawn chairs. The complainant, who had a history of fringe beliefs, was convinced they were undead government operatives sent to monitor his activities and demanded they present their official badges or be removed. 56. A homeowner placed a speaker inside a hollowed-out pumpkin and used it to play low, guttural breathing sounds whenever someone approached the porch. A neighbor complained that the sound was vibrating at a subsonic frequency that was causing their smart home devices to malfunction. They claimed their Alexa would randomly start playing death metal, and their smart toaster was burning everything. They were certain the demonic pumpkin frequency was to blame. 57. A complaint was filed about the unauthorized use of agricultural products for non-nutritional purposes. The subject was a neighbor's hay bale display. The complainant, an amateur farmer, was incensed that perfectly good hay was being used for frivolous decoration during a time of year when livestock are in need of winter fodder. He argued it was wasteful and disrespectful to the farming community, and that the hay should be donated to a local petting zoo immediately. 58. A family set up a display of spooky scarecrows in their cornfield-themed yard. The neighbor's complaint was that the scarecrows were too effective. They claimed the scarecrows were not only scaring away crows, but also the beneficial and aesthetically pleasing local songbirds like robins and blue jays. They demanded the scarecrows be made less intimidating so as not to disrupt the delicate balance of their backyard ecosystem. 59. In one of the laziest, yet somehow most infuriating complaints, a person called their landlord to complain about the apartment across the hall. The neighbor had simply taped a piece of paper to their door with the word "boo" written on it in black marker. The caller claimed the sign was aggressive and startling, and that they had to mentally prepare themselves every time they left their apartment to face the jump scare. 60. And finally, a resident complained that their neighbor's fog machine was creating a microclimate. They argued that the constant low-lying fog was raising the humidity on their side of the property line, causing mildew to form on their prize-winning garden gnomes. They submitted a detailed report, complete with humidity readings and photographic evidence of gnome-based fungal growth, demanding financial compensation for the cleaning and emotional distress of their ceramic friends. 61. In a classic case of good intentions gone wrong, a church organized a trunk or treat event in its parking lot as a safe alternative to traditional trick-or-treating. They received a formal complaint from a neighbor, a retired chemistry teacher, who argued that having dozens of cars idling in one place was creating a concentrated cloud of carbon monoxide and other volatile organic compounds. He claimed the fumes were contaminating the candy and demanded they conduct an air quality test. 62. A woman in Sedona, Arizona, complained to her HOA that her neighbor's witch-themed decorations were causing a significant psychic disturbance. She claimed the arrangement of their crystals, dream catchers, and a plastic cauldron was creating a negative energy vortex that was disrupting her own spiritual harmony, making her succulents wilt and causing her to have anxious, unfulfilling dreams. She requested they rearrange their display to be more feng shui compliant. 63. An HOA with an unusually specific rulebook sent a violation notice to a homeowner for their main decoration, a large custom-made monster with 6 arms and 1 giant eye. The problem? The HOA rules explicitly stated that all decorations must be recognized figures from classic folklore or popular culture, such as vampires, ghosts, or zombies. Their homemade creature was deemed non-canonical, and its lack of established lore was confusing for the children. 64. Here's a complaint that redefines the term first world problem. A parent on a neighborhood social media page publicly shamed a house for giving out full-sized candy bars. They weren't concerned about health. They were angry because the overly generous act created an unsustainable precedent for the rest of us. They argued that it made everyone else giving out fun-sized candy look cheap and was a form of conspicuous consumption that ruined the egalitarian spirit of the night. 65. a man filed a noise complaint against his neighbor for a sound effect, the simple, repetitive creak of a door opening. The issue was precision. He claimed the recorded sound was at the exact same pitch and cadence as the natural creak of his own back door. As a result, he spent the entire evening in a state of high alert, jumping up every 30 seconds, convinced an intruder was breaking into his house, only to realize it was just the neighbor's speaker. 66. This is a masterpiece of meta-complaining. A homeowner, clearly fed up with his HOA, set up a display featuring a skeleton sitting at a desk, furiously typing on a typewriter, surrounded by stacks of paper. In front of the skeleton was a sign that read, "Writing another complaint to the HOA." The HOA then sent him a complaint about his complaint-themed decoration, calling it a passive-aggressive and mocking display that undermines the authority of the board. 67. When a teenager's house was covered in toilet paper by their friends, a classic Halloween prank, the complaint didn't come from the homeowners themselves. It came from the next-door neighbor. They filed a report with the city for visual pollution, stating that the sight of toilet paper hanging from their neighbor's trees was aesthetically displeasing and was negatively impacting their morning view and property value. They demanded the city force the pranked family to clean it up faster. 68. A complaint was submitted to an apartment manager regarding a neighbor's decorations, which included several large, realistic rubber snakes placed in their window boxes. The complainant, an owner of a very vocal and intelligent parrot, claimed the fake snakes were sexually frustrating his bird. He attached a long, detailed letter explaining that the parrot, believing the snakes to be potential mates, was engaging in loud, incessant mating calls from dawn until dusk. 69. And for the grand finale, police in a quiet suburb received a frantic 911 call about a violent home invasion in progress. The neighbor reported seeing a shadowy figure tied to a chair, flailing wildly while another person stood over them menacingly. Officers arrived, weapons drawn, and surrounded the house. They burst in to find the homeowner alone, wearing a virtual reality headset and playing a horror game. The hostage was just him trying to fight off virtual zombies. Admit it. What ridiculous Halloween complaint would you actually file if no one knew it was you? Go unfiltered in the comments. If your HOA has approved spooky fonts, hit subscribe. If a printer paper boo can jump scare you, tap like. New episodes every week. Bring your candy, leave your dignity at the curb,